When our time is fragmented, we lose focus and concentration, but it also leaves us feeling very scattered. Now, there's going to be many people out there, there's hundreds of books, there's certainly loads of people on YouTube who are going to tell you about how to reclaim your focus, reclaim your time in order to be more productive. But I actually want to get you off of that productivity cult and think more about making space. And I mean space in your day, but I also mean space in your head. Because the further up you go, particularly if you're in a leadership role, the more your decisions impact a greater number of people. In my opinion, the CEO should be the least busy person in an organization. Not this ridiculous thing, well, you've got 10 minutes with her before lunch to pitch your multi-million-dollar idea. That's insane. Those people should really be considering and thinking about the decisions they have to make because they have a great impact. Your time is like the fossil fuels of your life. You don't know how much you have, and you're never getting it back. So instead, think about how can I spend this precious resource as carefully as possible. Does the organization I work for, or does this task that I'm doing, is it worthy of me spending this precious resource on it? In my little YouTube short, where I was talking about busy work being the junk food of work, I talked about some antidotes to that I promised to make some videos about. So this one's about calendaring. A long time ago, 10 years ago, Mike Monteiro posted a blog post on Medium called The Chokehold of Calendars. And in it, he talked about this idea of the problem with calendars being that they are additive rather than subtractive. So people say, oh, we're just going to put a meeting in your calendar. I've booked an hour in your calendar. But actually what they're doing is taking an hour of your life, right? The fossil fuels of your life. You're not getting it back. And so what happens is they gradually, over time, if people put a lot of bookings in your calendar, or you have a lot of meetings in your calendar, it's just subtracting loads of your time away from you. And we don't really think of it like that. If someone came up to you and said, hey, could I have an hour of your life force? You would probably go, well, it must be very important for me to give that to you. But with calendars, somehow we don't think about it. People just kind of chuck stuff in there. Years ago, when hard drives were still a thing instead of solid state drives, there used to be these problem you used to get where they get fragmented. And so the file, it wasn't one sort of contiguous piece on the sort of magnetic circle on the hard drive. It was all in lots of little bits. It was just kind of placed in whatever space they had available. And gradually it would slow down your computer because the hard drive, the head was moving all over the place to try and find something. And certainly things like, streaming video or audio, you really needed to have a defragmented drive. And those tools that used to get to do it had this very nice thing where you'd see your sort of scattered sort of dots of files everywhere, and it would spend, half an hour removing everything around until they were all in these nice contiguous kind of blocks of color. And that's what I'm suggesting you do to your calendar. So the first thing is, when I get coaches coming in and they've got this slightly sort of frazzled, scattered nature to them, they're really, really busy, and it's like, oh, you have to come down for coaching. Okay, I can kind of see it, right? And I think we all know what that experience feels like, and I think we all know it when we see it. So one of the first things I get to do, I ask them is, can you show me your calendar? And when I look at it, it is predictably what you might imagine, which is it looks like doesn't even look like a game of Tetris. It looks like 3 games of Tetris all placed on top of each other because there's always lots of overlapping blocks and things like that. And it's a mess. So the next thing is I usually kind of quickly visually do this and look at how much actual free time do they have? How much spare time do they have in their calendar to kind of do their real work? And in general, it's anything, but in a bad case, like half a day. But in a good case, maybe a day, 2 days, day and a half, something like that is free time. So I ask, well, so when do you do your real work? Because when I look through the calendar items, it's all meetings and one-to-ones and stand-ups and all that kind of stuff. And, inevitably the answer is, well, at evenings and weekends. So what that means is, though, is your employer or your boss is going to be saying, oh, this needs to be done. This is really important. And you're basically saying, this is more important than time for myself or time with my family. So I'm going to work on the evenings and weekends for free, because that's not what your contract says, right? And then I'm going to do all this kind of meeting and busy work stuff during the week. And it is really important to reframe that. It's so important to kind of reframe that and really think about what's actually going on here. Because, I often hear, yeah, well, it just has to be done. Okay, but that has to be done. But the problem is that if you don't send the feedback loop back upwards to say, hey, the ambitions you have aren't being resourced correctly, there's not enough time, there's not enough people to do this work, then leadership will say, make an unrealistic demand. You'll work the evenings and weekends to make it happen, or you'll force other people to work evenings and weekends to make it happen. And leadership think, oh, that worked. Let's ask them to do that again. And when you push back and say, well, actually, we need more time, they go, well, you did it last time. What's the problem? And so, that's one thing why you need to kind of be very, very clear about and realistic about how much time do you actually have. One way to do this is you take all the things you have to do, right? And you just block them out. And I've seen it done in Figma, on Mural or Miro. You can do it in a spreadsheet. You can even use a new calendar to do it. And you take everything and you can block it out in that defragmented way, that sort of contiguous way. So you put all your one-to-ones in one block, and you put all of your other kind of stand-ups, things like that. They eat up a lot of time. There'll be regular meetings, the killer of everything, right? They're the biggest busy work crime. You'll have weekly, leadership meetings or senior leadership meetings or some other things, right? There'll be a whole bunch of stuff that you'll have. And my suggestion is you take your week, you take your 5 days of your week that you work, or however many days you work, and you just make four blocks morning and afternoon, 8 blocks per day. So that is, an 8-hour day. And then you fill those up with the stuff and contiguously. So you're saying, okay, well, actually I'm doing, 8 hours of one-to-ones per week. And then I'm doing, I don't know, probably 8 hours of recruitment. If you're a design leader, you're often having to spend a lot of time in recruitment. And there'll be a whole bunch of other stuff. And then what you've got left over, well, that's the time to do the other stuff. That's important because when you give yourself a budget, to really keep track of your spending, what you're really doing there is having a look and being realistic about the time available. And then what you do is you take a task on and whatever it is, I've got to do this presentation for this or whatever it is. When you think, I've got a week to do this, you haven't really. Right? And this is the trap that I think people fall into all the time is they think, or their boss might say, well, I gave you 2 weeks to do that. What's the problem? You actually only had maybe 2 days to do that. And it may be a task that takes longer than 2 days. And so that's the first thing, is to get realistic about that. So when you're taking on tasks, that you're realistically how long it's going to take. And if it's going to take longer, well, then you're faced with the choice. You either say, well, actually, it's going to take me longer than that because I've got all this other stuff on, or you're going to have to get rid of some of the other stuff to make time and make space to do that thing. So, the blocking out thing works really well. It's also quite a good way to sort of make the case, to make the argument to a boss if they don't really kind of get why you're so busy or why you don't have enough time. And to finally actually just show, don't tell, look, here's all the stuff. And I've seen this be very successful for people in both those cases. Look at what you can also delete. And I really mean delete. I guarantee you're not as important as you think you are. So there are going to be plenty of meetings, particularly kind of regular ones, you probably don't need to be at, and you probably don't need to turn up all the time. There's a significant amount of FOMO that goes into being at a meeting or not being at a meeting, because you think, what if someone says something is important, and what if I'm not in the know about things. You go on holiday, you're sick, the world doesn't end. I promise you can probably get rid of half of your meetings and nothing will happen. If you're responsible for those meetings and you're responsible for some kind of regular meeting, be really intentional about it. What is it that you want to get out of that meeting? What is it that, who needs to be there? Are all the people there actually adding something to it? Are they getting something from it? If not, really consider getting rid of it. And particularly regular ones, you just dump them and then make them again if you feel you need them. But quite often you have a kind of regular meeting there. Everyone feels like, I need to come up with something to fill up that time. And so you fill up the time and it's a waste of time. So I want to talk about defensive calendaring. Now it's sort of, people talk about defended time and so forth. And there's quite a lot out there already. The biggest thing I think as a brain killer is back-to-back meetings. Now, in the old days of people actually going into work, you might have back-to-back meetings, but you probably were a little bit late to most of them. Certainly, once you'd started the first one, and you may have left them a bit early too. With things like Zoom and remote working or Teams or whatever kind of tool you're using, they really are back-to-back. Literally, you hang up from one and you dial straight into the next. Or you've got people in the waiting room or whatever. And it is really jarring. I guarantee you, for a 30-minute back-to-back, so a 30-minute one-to-one or something like that, if you've got 4 or 5 of those, for the first 5 or even 10 minutes of it, you're going to be thinking about the one you just come from still. There's some sort of residue from that. And for the last 5 minutes or so, you'll be thinking about the one you have to go to. And you're probably, like all of us, fiddling around with kind of notes and prepping for it and so forth, or finishing up on notes from the last one whilst you're kind of not entirely concentrating on the current one. So that means you get sort of 15, 20 minutes maybe of actual concentrated attention time on the person you're having a conversation with or the meeting you're in when you do that. And so, a fundamental thing, I know I'm sort of sounding like I'm fragmenting it for us, to just create some buffer time in between. There's a couple of apps. There's Reclaim or Motion. Both of those are sort of AI driven, like everything is AI driven, where they're kind of, they plug into your Google Calendar. I've seen them use them. My friend of mine, Nicole van der Hoeven's got a good video of it, and I'll put a link below about Reclaim. They both kind of use AI to reschedule, shuffle your calendar around. Now, you can do that. I am a bit allergic to having that stuff automated. Even when I've had someone who was an assistant, human doing it for me, I kind of like to manage my own calendar because I like to protect my time. So the manual way of doing this is making sure you put buffer time in between any meeting. So that's 5, maybe 10 minutes, so that people can't book a time either side of that. Sometimes you can do it server side, and things like Reclaim and Motion sort of automate this. Sometimes you can set it up in your calendar. If you're using a booking app like Calendly or something like that, then you can set that up in those too. If you don't have that possibility, the way to do it manually is to make what I call a shadow calendar, and that's a blocker calendar. So in Google Calendar or in Outlook, you can have multiple calendars, but really they're kind of virtual ones, right? They show up to other people just as kind of blocks of time that are available or not. So, you book in a meeting, and then in your shadow calendar, you book in another blocker that runs 5 minutes later and 5 minutes earlier than that meeting that you've just put in. Now, that's a bit of effort because you kind of obviously have to do double booking, but it's one of the only ways they're doing it if you're beholden to some IT department who don't set that stuff up server side. And that means it's blocked, right? That means it's busy. And then your task is to defend it. Now, people will often try and kind of go, well, I'm going to book in. It's really rude, right? I'm going to book in a meeting that overlaps with one that I can see you already have in your calendar. And then you just say, no, I'm sorry, I've got a meeting then. Or, I'm going to be 10 minutes late, or I'll have to leave it 10 minutes early. Which brings me on to another thing. Try thinking about booking meetings that are unusual lengths of time, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 50 minutes, things like that. We get so used to the tools dictating us in sort of half-hour blocks that we tend to do half-hour, 1-hour meetings. And quite often, you don't need that amount of time. So you can, if you intentionally book sort of unusual amounts of time, you'll end up by default with kind of little pockets of kind of breathing space in between. And then the other thing is obviously, this really comes from, well, a bunch of things, whether it's, about kind of focus time. One of my favorite books is the book called Make Time by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky. And it's not a productivity book. It really is about kind of making time. It's releasing kind of time in your day. But they have this idea of a kind of highlight thing. So what's the one thing you're trying to achieve in the day? And you book out an hour or 2 hours if you can, at some point in the day, whatever is your sort of most productive time. Or less productive, than more about your kind of focused time, and you block that out and you really defend it so that you can say at the end of the day, yeah, I did this one thing. I think we all secretly know when we're doing the junk fooding of work, of busy work. I think we know what that feels like. I think we quite often just want to give ourselves the illusion that we haven't really done that we have actually been productive. And look at all the stuff I've done. I've been really, really busy today. And I think the big tell is when someone says to you and asks you at the end of the day, hey, how was your day? What did you do today? And you can't really answer it. And it's like, well, I don't know, sort of did a lot of email, answered a lot of Slack messages. Then that's when you can't say, well, I did this thing and I did these other 2 smaller things. Then I think you've been doing the junk food of busy work. So, all of this gives you space and time so that you are really able to kind of spend a little bit more time concentrating on the stuff you want to do, being more intentional about your day and the way you show up, because that's really what you also need to do, particularly as a leader. In the next video, I'm going to talk about email. I'll probably talk about Slack and the kind of barrage of other things coming in different channels. But try some of those different things. Try, if you want to automate it, try Reclaim or Motion. I'll put some links down here. It'll support me doing this work if you do. But you can also just try doing it manually in a shadow calendar. I've run a shadow calendar for years and years and years, and it's my favorite way. You can just kind of block out bits of time. Nobody needs to know why they should not have your time. And needs to know why you're not available at this point in time. It's not up to them. It's up to you. Your time is your life. You're never going to get it back. So make sure you defend it well and spend it wisely. If you like this, please, subscribe, do all the things, follow the links in the show notes. You'll see there all my stuff around my coaching practice, training services, my newsletter, Doctor's Note, and my podcast, Power of 10. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.